For those of you who don't know me, my name is Melissa Watley, and I am the Zell and Shirley Miller Fellow for this academic year. I have the distinct honor of welcoming you to the annual Louise McBee Lecture. This lecture series was launched in 1989, making this year the 30th anniversary of the Louise McBee Lecture. Indeed, the McBee Lecture is the nation's longest-standing lecture series that focuses solely on higher education. This lecture honors one of Georgia's best-known and most revered citizens, Dr. Louise McBee, UGA Vice President for Academic Affairs Emerita and former state representative. Dr. McBee completed a PhD at The Ohio State University and held educational positions in Virginia and Tennessee before moving to the University of Georgia as Dean of Women in 1963. Over the following 5 decades, she was influential both at the University of Georgia and beyond, and in the state of Georgia. Here at UGA, she used her keen insight into people and her superb communication skills to navigate sometimes turbulent waters involving student unrest that accompanied social changes happening across campuses in the 60s and 70s, a vast expansion of UGA's campus, and fallout from other major political events. As a soon-to-be triple dog, I am especially grateful for her work for the advancement of women on campus. She fought for equity in salaries, hiring of more women faculty members, and fair admission standards for women students who previously had been held to higher standards than their male counterparts. She served both as a role model and a bellwether for change. In 1991, after her retirement from UGA, she was elected to the Georgia House of Representatives, where she served 6 terms before stepping down in 2004. In her final term in the House, she served as chair of the House Higher Education Committee. She played a key role in setting state policy in higher education across the state of Georgia. It is an honor for the Institute of Higher Education to hold this lecture in her name and to house the McBee Professorship. Dr. McBee could not be with us here today due to health issues, but we are grateful for the presence of Margie and Peter Shedd, both of whom are here with us today, both for being here with us today and for the good attention they give to Dr. McBee. Please join me in thanking Dr. McBee for her outstanding contributions to the state of Georgia, the University of Georgia, and higher education overall. I'll now turn over the floor to President Moorhead, who will introduce today's speaker.
Well, Good morning, everyone. This is truly a special day for the University of Georgia as we have the honor of welcoming President Susan Herbst from the University of Connecticut back to our campus. I am also very pleased today to welcome 2 great friends of the university, our former President, now our President Emeritus, Charles Knapp. Thank you, Dr. Knapp, for being with us today. As well as Regent Richard Tucker. Thank you, Regent, for being with us today. President Herbst became the first female president of the University of Connecticut in 2011. And over the past 8 years, she has led multiple initiatives to strengthen teaching, research, and service at UConn, including the hiring of 300 new tenured or tenure-track faculty members. She leads a university that, like our own, is making significant investments in research, education, and innovation, particularly in the STEM disciplines. And she has led the implementation of a $1.5 billion initiative known as the Next Generation Connecticut to expand opportunities in this critical area over the coming decade. This includes new and updated facilities, expanding the faculty, and increasing student enrollment. Bioscience Connecticut is another initiative that she has led. This is an $864 million effort to revitalize the UConn health enterprise, increasing enrollment in medical and dental classes, building new business incubators, and expanding partnerships. Prior to becoming president of UConn, Dr. Herbst served as the Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Academic Officer of the University System of Georgia, where she led 15 university presidents and oversaw the academic missions for all then 35 public universities in Georgia. During her tenure at USG, we became very good friends as she helped the University of Georgia develop our engineering proposal and worked with us as we created what is now the College of Engineering, a transformative development for the University of Georgia, and something that we will always be grateful to her for the leadership that she provided during that period. President Herbst holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Duke University, a PhD in communication theory and research from the University of Southern California's Annenberg School of Communication. She is an acclaimed scholar of public opinion, media, American politics. She has continued to publish in these areas throughout her career, and her most recent book is titled Rude Democracy: Civility and Incivility in American Politics. She continues to serve as a co-editor of the University of Chicago Press Series on American politics, and she is a member of the board of directors of APLU. We are absolutely thrilled to welcome Susan Herbst back to the University of Georgia, and we look forward to your lecture. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me here today. It is great to be at University of Georgia. You know, I love this place. I love this campus. I love the feel of it. It's so forward-looking and progressive and positive. You know, it was a blast being in the system office, don't get me wrong, but it was best to be out on the campuses, and this was by far one of my favorites. Jerry and I, we had a great time together. We cooked up a lot of schemes, and most of them successful. I think bringing engineering here was a major deal, and I'm glad that it's thriving and serving the students in the state really well. But Jerry and the folks here at UGA were, you know, part of what gave me intellectual sustenance in the systems office. Not that that's not an intellectually stimulating place. But, you know, the action for a university system is always on the campuses. That's where the talent is. That's where the students are, and that's what gives it life. Chuck Knapp was, you know, somebody I had known about, I'd heard about, but I hadn't met until I moved to Atlanta, and it was so nice to see him all the time. He inspired me. He supported me. I didn't know if I had come to the right place or what to do exactly, because my role was sort of undefined, but he helped me a lot and made me so incredibly glad I came. So thanks, Chuck, and thanks for being here. I'm also thrilled that Regent Tucker is here. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. He's one of the most hilarious people I've ever met. You know, as a Northerner, he gave me this great introduction to Southern culture and Southern ways of thinking, and I so appreciated it, and he cracked me up all the time. We were also partners in crime, and I think for the good of the state and the good of the nation. Richard Tucker, American. So very grateful to be here in honor of a pioneer like Louise McBee. She was a superb female academic leader at a time when there weren't many of us, and somehow also had the fortitude to serve in the Georgia State House, where she really distinguished herself as well. So I got to watch the oral history of her online in preparation for coming here, and she really is an inspiration and a model of civility, which is my topic today, incivility in America and how I see it, what it has to do with the future of higher education, particularly as professors and administrators. So I look forward to hearing your questions, your comments at the end. Happy to talk about running in university also, or anything else that I can help with. So I've always been interested in the more sticky, nebulous topics in democratic theory and practice. And it's interesting to me from a scholarly perspective, but it's also really frustrating. So for 25 years, I've studied public opinion, which is a phenomenon that gets increasingly complicated every passing year with new technology. And I put civility in that category also, right there with public opinion. In our time, they're conflated. They're tied together in ways that we never expected. Civility, for people who study democratic theory, is what makes a public possible. Civility, it's crucial, it's pivotal to American democratic practice. Civility is not talked about in the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. The Founding Fathers just assumed it for various reasons in a tiny new nation, but of course they knew that democracy was impossible without civility. So I wrote a book on civility a few years ago. It's really outdated, given what's happened in the last few years. But I wrote it because of its chronic and vital place in American democracy, not because I foresaw that Nazis would march through the University of Virginia campus, or that we'd become a nation that really drives on, the discourse is driven by a lot of insults, name-calling, and a kind of an everyday intolerance, racism, misogyny, and a lot of harm done by social media. But obviously, the current climate is even more motivating to us who are trying to understand the lines between raucous debate and really dangerous, hateful discourse. Beyond political science, though, and democratic theory, one of the big drivers, the reasons I wrote the book on civility was because of my experience with students over the decades, and in particular with undergraduates. So when I wrote the book, I'd been working with one of our legislators in the state assembly, I'm not sure if he's still there or not, on free speech matters. He was worried about free speech, and in particular, honestly, whether liberal college professors were crushing free speech here at our campuses throughout Georgia. So I said to him, it's an empirical question, so let's have a look. And we decided to do a survey, 2 years in a row, of about 2,000 university students across the state. And our goal was to make sure that students felt comfortable in classrooms on the campus and expressing their political opinions. So one of the findings to me was not surprising at all because I'm a faculty member and those are my people. There were no unusual complaints about the faculty. Some students liked some faculty, didn't like others, all that kind of usual stuff. But and to this day, so the faculty were not a problem in terms of this, this free speech crushing matter. And to this day, there are one-off articles in the Chronicle of Higher Education or some weird stories sometimes in media of a naughty professor who's somehow trying to crush speech. But on the whole, those are pretty unrepresentative of what goes on in the classroom. And it was true for Georgia, and it's certainly true for my university as well. That said, what we found in the survey, especially when we looked at the open-ended answers to our questions, was a real profound discomfort in talking about politics, religion, race, sexuality, and important issues, students with each other. They were worried about getting in a fight with other students, about being passionate and it wouldn't be welcome, concerned about saying something offensive, or just being upset. So the most important takeaway from the survey and part of my book was that students don't feel great about political argument. In fact, they want to avoid political argument at all costs because they know or they think it's going to lead to incivility, disruption, unhappiness, which is really hard to handle interpersonally. Like, people go on social media for that. It's a lot less disturbing, but face to face, it's scary and worrisome to students. So I found it troubling, but it rang true, and I thought back to my own undergraduate years, and I don't know that I was ever good at making arguments to my fellow students, or that I really sought out other students who didn't agree with me. I don't know if I ever changed my mind. But taking it to a higher level, to a grand level, the question is whether America knows how to argue, how to be civil, how to disagree in a productive fashion. And I think the answer is a resounding no. Hence our current political discourse, which is flip and it's hysterical, it's annoying, and it can be downright dangerous. So there's incivility all around us, of course, and I'm not talking about lack of manners or general social rudeness, like, when somebody parks in that space you were clearly waiting for with your blinkers on, or gives you the finger in traffic. And I get that a lot. And my husband said it's because I'm a terrible driver, not anything due to incivility in Connecticut, but jury's out. So these are more in the realm of social manners, and they're very important. We have a lot of great historians who study the evolution of social manners, but I'm more interested in political civility, discourse, how we talk, how we tolerate each other's beliefs, and whether it goes anywhere productive with regard to public policy. So let me talk about three aspects of political civility today. First, briefly, civility in American history. Just to get some context, have we hit bottom in 2019? Where have we been as a nation? Then I want to talk a little bit about the balance between civility and incivility and argue that maybe a little incivility is helpful. It's hard to think about that right now. It's very hard, but maybe we need a tougher skin. Third, let me talk about how we might boost civility, particularly through schools and colleges, and these are places that still can have the most powerful effect on shaping us as citizens. And we have real responsibility in higher education to try to come at these problems, even if they're big and they're daunting. So to history, it looks like there's incivility all around us, but compared to what? Historians are always trying to remind us, without a lot of success, that incivility has been a constant in American life. We always fought with each other, pretty viciously, and far worse than today in many decades. In the 18th century, in the days of our founding, incivility was chronic. We had duels, we had ugly language, mudslinging, not so much directed at England, but at each other. I was recently reading this great book about Thomas Jefferson's battles with the politicians and the ministers to build the University of Virginia. It was as nasty as anything you'd see in public today or in Congress. That's a great book, by the way. It's by Gary Wills. It's called Mr. Jefferson's University. That's what they like to call themselves, but it's true. Staying with our founding fathers, not models of civility or dignity. They all called each other weak, egomaniacs, governed by temper, defective, anything you could think of to try to degrade each other. The 19th century didn't see a lot of improvement, far from it. Americans argued all the time in ways that demean themselves and as others. Often, as Alexis de Tocqueville, a perceptive visitor from France, noted when he traveled around in the mid-19th century, we silence each other all the time through speech and intimidation. In fact, even though Tocqueville traveled around America, he loved America, East Coast, Midwest, he was really super conscious of our flaws, in particular, how willing we were to crush minority opinion with whatever we had. So that's a part of Tocqueville when he gets quoted that a lot of people leave out. It was Tocqueville in the 1830s, who coined the phrase tyranny of the majority, and he was writing about us. Tocqueville analyzed inequality, tension over slavery, prejudice in non-slave states, but he could not have foreseen, because he was here a little too early, the brutal dip in civility in the 1850s. And without question, that's our worst period in American political, intellectual history. So 1850s, we were approaching the Civil War that would divide us, that would change the nation forever, and the kind of incivility that we sustained for years in the 1850s makes cable news and even the most hateful tweeting look like child's play. A very famous image of incivility of that period is the one I grabbed from my book cover. It's a beating on the floor of the U.S. Senate. It was after a speech, and so Senator Sumner, he's from Massachusetts, gave a speech about, he's an abolitionist, anti-slavery, and was sitting at his desk in the Senate, sending out probably propaganda back to his district. And Representative Preston Brooks, he was from South Carolina, came over from the House side to the Senate side. He stalked Sumner a little bit, and then he burst into the Senate chamber and he tried to kill him with a cane, which he nearly did. It took Sumner, I think, years to recover from that. All on the floor of the U.S. Senate with, tons of senators around. But that incident, it's not the only instance of brutality in Congress. People carried around guns with them, and they pulled them on each other. Lots of bench clearing brawls. But it was an iconic moment in American history because it represented the depth of emotion about slavery and abolition in particular. So in the 18th and 19th century, people really did try to kill each other openly because of offenses to their families, feuds, insults. So it makes us seem somewhat more civilized, although it's not a lot of comfort these days when you live in the 21st century and not the 19th. So incivility, don't mean to make it sound so ancient. You know, it rolled with us into the 20th century from the 19th. Lynchings, for example, were justified as a form of social action in the South until the 1960s. There was, incivility, murder rooted in the ground, North and South, but also in our political discourse. And FDR, as you may know, was labeled as an evil socialist, a fascist. Reagan was a monster. George W. Bush was a village idiot, and so on. He was called a village idiot. Incivility is worrisome in a lot of ways, but it was made more so by the diffusion of broadcast media. So, interestingly, back in the mid-20th century, two great social scientists from Columbia, Paul Lazarsfeld and Robert Merton, they coined a term for the problematic effect of media, and they called it the narcotizing dysfunction. And Lazarsfeld and Merton argued that too much exposure to media, and they were writing about radio, because there was no TV then. Writing about radio, they said that too much exposure to media could be debilitating, that you listen to the media, you watch it, the constant political talk, and they argued that this leads to inaction, not to action, that you start to replace doing with knowing. And I had a great example. I remember I was teaching this back when I lived in Chicago, and we lived in the suburbs, and our house was a mirror opposite of the other house next door, the house next door, and I could see they were older people, I could see into their kitchen, they could see into my kitchen, and the older woman there, all she did all day was watch CNN. And but she told me, I said to her one day, so you watch a lot of CNN, and she said, I'm a political animal. I'm just a very political person. But, I know that she never left that kitchen or that TV. But she's a perfect example of the Lazarsfeld and Merton, replaced all this knowing with actually doing something. But I'd go further than this, than those guys did in the 1940s, and argue that seeing incivility on television and the internet makes that debilitation even worse. I mean, it's true that media figures like Rush Limbaugh or people like him, as famous as him, have been able to encourage political activity and voting. Same with Rachel Maddow or Stephen Colbert on the other side. But on the whole, the political chatter around us isn't inspiring to action. I think far from it. It makes you want to avoid public politics, like the students in my surveys. It makes you want to cower in your living room, on your sofa and huddle around your iPhone, watching like-minded political news shows, ordering from Amazon, or watching Netflix. So moving to part two, I said I'd defend incivility a little bit, or at least the balance of civility and incivility. So a few words on that. The fact that incivility has been present, has been a constant throughout American history, even if varied intensity, it does make you wonder, and it's hard to swallow, do people like incivility? They're drawn to it. They certainly find incivility useful, and I'd argue that civility and incivility are not states of mind or moods of a nation, but they're really like strategic assets that people use to get what they want. And that's the main argument in my book. But the reason that you see so much negative advertising during campaigns, and brace yourself for whatever's coming the next 2 years, is because negativity and incivility even, it works. It gets out the vote, it raises money, it mobilizes people to vote. The reason horrible talk show hosts are still on is because people tune in, they're drawn to it, they like it. So I've written about incivility as a strategic weapon, and if we think about it that way, it is less hurtful. So even rudeness or trash talk is, if it's seen as talk, as just talk, and it's a weapon in your rhetorical arsenal, then maybe it's a little less disturbing. And maybe people need a thicker skin and not be so appalled and aghast and outraged all the time by the name calling, by the insulting labels. If it is free speech, why do we find it so problematic when we can use our speech to defend ourselves, our positions, our fellow believers? You know, when did we become so concerned with each other's feelings, become so fragile with regard to free discourse? Sometimes we seem like delicate flowers, very, very different from what the founders had envisioned. They had envisioned a very rough and tumble kind of democracy, and they were comfortable with that and still thought it was great for a founding of a nation. Going a little bit further, and now this is getting into one of the darker corners of American democracy, maybe incivility is inherently attractive to us. It's always been a part of this nation. There must be something functional about it. So I have a colleague at the University of Texas, his name's Rod Hart, and he outlines some of the reasons why incivility attracts us and keeps our interests. So here's a few items from his list. Incivility, Rod says, is dramatic and it's engaging. It's addictive, it's entertaining television, radio, social media. It keeps people's eyes glued to computer screens. So it's dramatic, it's engaging. He says incivility is dialectical. Incivility, almost always, the way you see it manifest these days, is a two-sided argument that gets very heated. When we know this is a really complex, muddy world that doesn't really have two sides. So incivility drives this kind of simplicity of black and white, and we like that because it simplifies a world that we find overwhelmingly complex many times. Also, this is, I think, most interesting. He argues that incivility is social. So incivility weirdly connects us. It's kind of repulsive, but it's sometimes inspiring. It connects people and ideas together. So incivility, inherently social. I have no answer, and if math psychology, like we used to do in the 1950s, were still in fashion, we might have some insights, but we've got to ponder this. You know, what is it about incivility that always draws us back? Why is it always with us, no matter how woke and sophisticated we are and we think we get with every passing century? Part three, finally, to come out of the darkness. I said I had some ideas about how to reduce incivility, or at least make it more tolerable in the sense of getting used to it, and even getting practice with it, practice dealing with it. So what can we do? Here are a few possibilities. First, teach argument. And I mean debate. In classes, as a required class, not outside the class. Not public speaking, which is a requirement in a lot of universities and colleges across the country, but argumentation. I don't know of any major university that requires the kind of argumentation class I'm talking about, but it can certainly be done in middle schools and high schools, college. It's not hard to learn. There are so many free resources and curricula by very talented teachers available on the internet. But teaching argument, I think, is one of the few ways out of our conundrum and enabling people to take incivility less personally and more intellectually. Number two, the university administration, so here's what I know best, has to invite controversial speakers and set up debates. So let's be very honest with ourselves. Right now, higher education administrators, people I talk to and hang out with across the country, we all live in fear. We hope and we pray that no student group, because it's never us, will invite some worrisome speaker from the left or the right, an event that could go horribly wrong, and then it's all about, getting the campus police and student affairs and rallying the troops, especially in the light of what happened in Charlottesville. People start to see visions now, and it's very vivid because of that, about what can go wrong if a controversial speaker comes to campus. So we should, and I'm not sure that I've been entirely successful where I am. I think we're getting a little better about it. Try to do this for the students. This way, universities could bring very controversial speakers who speak more on policy and substance as compared to the real, drama queen speakers that students tend to invite because they find them exciting and interesting. But maybe we should try to, grab that from them and do it our own way, which will, I think, be more productive and more substantive. It's hard for university leaders to do this, to invite the really edgy people. We would rather just be reactive and worry a lot. But we're in containment mode for sure. And I think we should be taking the lead and just taking care that, we're going to have some events that could be pretty raucous, but we'll broaden our students along the full ideological spectrum. Third, we have to have debate, but we also have to have a culture of listening. So this is the goal of, StoryCorps. Do you ever listen to that on NPR? It's a project where people in booths and radio booths tell each other important life stories, and the purpose is to teach close listening to each other. It's a great model. NPR started this with more socio-historical topics, like somebody talking about growing up in the segregated South to someone else. Now they've careened more toward very personal stuff, and people ended expressing love to each other, which is really nice. But I think moving back to people talking about either policy matters or historical events that happened that were very, very difficult, and having other people listen to that is a wonderful model. So that's been an interesting approach to listening. But the folks who have probably paid most attention to listening as a skill are, of course, those who study learning, particularly K-8. And I really enjoyed looking at this literature because I've never been a teacher at that level, and I don't know much about the education literature at that level. But for example, there's two researchers, they're called Funk and Funk, who wrote this in 1989. They had an article called Guidelines for Developing Listening Skills. And they wrote that teachers should, quote, provide a purpose for listening. Perhaps providing a purpose for listening is the single most important responsibility of the classroom teacher and one of the most neglected. Children should be given a specific purpose for listening, for each listening experience, and every effort should be made to make sure they understand what is called for. Listening for the main idea, identifying supporting details, detecting moods, differentiating fact from fiction, selecting descriptive vocabulary, etc. They need guidance as to what they are expected to learn from each listening activity, and this guidance should increase their comprehension and retention. But most important, they should not be asked to listen to an oral presentation, but should be directed what to listen for, a distinction that's crucial in teaching listening anywhere. So that really gave me pause when I read it. We sit on our hands and we try to remain calm when we listen to people who we disagree with or commentators we disagree with. But they're asking us to, what are we listening for? If we try to teach this to listen for something, in my ideal world of a required argumentation class or maybe in a first-year experience course, we'll be doing really well, because listening for demands that you actually process the content of the argument, the drivers, and critically try to bring down the emotion that comes with trying to listen to something you hate. So I've been trying this for a little while, since I read this, when listening to pundits who I disagree with, and it actually works if you try to listen for instead of just, brace yourself to listen to. But it takes a lot of discipline, a lot of practice for college students, no doubt. So very last, in the area of fixes and how to diminish incivility, or at least the pain that comes with it, this is the hardest path of all, which is to hold a mirror up to ourselves as citizens to figure out why we're attracted so much to outrage, to incivility in our discourse. And I get into this very typical kind of discussion with students all the time where They tell me that they've been microaggressed against or threatened in a social media discussion or series of posts, and then I tell them to stop going on there, because they're so offended, they're so hurt by something they saw on social media that got posted or tweeted at them or whatever, and they, that doesn't take with them at all. I mean, I tell them to stop it, take long breaks from social media on political matters, and they say they don't want to do it, or they psychically can't do it, which I find worrisome. So it's a standoff between me and them. So let's get our students to question why they're drawn to this kind of conflict. So often lacking in substance, way too intense on emotion, takes a lot of strength, takes a lot of self-discipline, but I think we have to keep at it. So nothing wrong with some incivility. It seems like a chronic part of heated debate, but we can learn to recognize it better, critique it, deal with it. And it's a structural matter, whether we want to do things like build debate into high school curricula or demand media that offer more substantive debate. But at the end of the day, it's a cultural matter. Most of all, do we really want to become a nation based on civility and substantive argument? If so, we have to force a higher level of sophistication and also toughen up. Learn to live with some incivility, some negativity, but not be blinded by it, and keep pressing for real substantive debate. So our very last word to end on is the discourse of our leaders. They're a mirror of us, no more, no less. The world we see is just how we raise our young people, families, schools, churches, neighborhoods, universities. That's where the leadership has to be. With us, that's where the answers are. It's where the action is. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they don't have any answers, from what I could tell. And they're not in charge of making us better or making us stronger, making us more democratic. No matter what you like on there, what you see, they are for-profit entertainers and they're journalists, and they have particular agendas that we may not have in our schools and our families. So it's squarely on us to fix this mess. So let's face it with gravity, with civility, and all the grace we can find in our hearts. One can debate tactics, but there's really nothing wrong. It's nothing corny about quoting Gandhi or MLK. They changed the world against all odds, and we can do it too. It's entirely possible. So thanks again for listening civilly. Without outrage. Look forward to hearing your ideas, your questions, suggestions, and again, grateful to be here. So thank you.